The ice cracked beneath the wooden ferry with a sound like distant thunder. But Sarah Winters barely flinched as she pulled the oars through the half-frozen water of the Yukon River, her gloved hands moving with the practiced rhythm of someone who had made this crossing 1,000 times before. It was January 1892, and Nome, Alaska had just begun to transform from a scattered collection of prospector camps into something resembling a real settlement. Sarah had been running the ferry service for 3 winters now, ever since her father had died from pneumonia and left her the small operation. At 23 years old, she had become something of a fixture on the river, the silent woman who could navigate the treacherous winter waters when no one else would dare. Most people waited for spring to cross, but there were always a few who needed passage during the brutal winter months, and Sarah never turned away a paying customer. The passengers this morning were the usual sort. 2 miners heading to the goldfields, wrapped in furs and keeping their heads down against the bitter wind. An older woman clutching a basket of supplies. And then there was the cowboy. He stood out immediately, not just because cowboys were rare this far north, but because of the way he carried himself. He wore a long leather duster over wool clothes, and his hat was pulled low against the wind, but she could see the line of his jaw, strong and clean-shaven in a land where most men grew beards for warmth. His horse, a sturdy chestnut mare, stood calm despite the rocking of the ferry. Sarah noticed these things the way she noticed everything about her passengers, cataloging details in case something went wrong. The river had no mercy for carelessness. They reached the opposite bank without incident, and the passengers disembarked, pressing coins into her palm. The cowboy was last. He met her eyes for just a moment, and she saw they were a startling green, the color of new leaves in spring, something she had almost forgotten existed in this world of white and gray. "Thank you, madam," he said, his voice deep and touched with a Texas drawl that sounded impossibly out of place among the Norwegian and Swedish accents that dominated Nome. Sarah nodded, saying nothing. She rarely spoke to passengers. He led his horse onto the frozen bank and mounted up, and she watched him ride toward the goldfields before turning the ferry around for the return journey. The wind had picked up, sending ice crystals stinging against her face. She pulled her scarf higher and began to row. 3 hours later, she was surprised to see a lone figure waiting at the landing on the far side. As she drew closer, she realized with a jolt of confusion that it was the same cowboy, still on his horse, his breath pluming white in the frigid air. "Need to cross back," he said simply when she pulled up to the bank. Sarah frowned but said nothing. She took his money and he guided his horse back onto the ferry. The crossing was silent except for the creak of the oars and the groan of ice. When they reached the Nome side, he disembarked and tipped his hat to her. "Obliged," he said, and rode off toward the small cluster of buildings that made up the town's main street. Sarah watched him go, puzzlement nagging at her mind. The crossing cost $1 each way. That was expensive, especially for someone who had apparently accomplished nothing on the other side. But it was not her business. She secured the ferry and headed to the small cabin she rented on the edge of town, where she would warm herself by the stove before making the next scheduled crossing in the afternoon. The next morning he was there again. This time, Sarah could not hide her surprise. The cowboy stood on the dock with his horse, looking as calm and patient as if this were the most normal thing in the world. She pulled the ferry up, and he stepped aboard. "Morning," he said pleasantly. Sarah studied him more carefully now. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26. His face was weathered from sun and wind, but handsome in a rough-hewn way. There was something in his expression that was hard to read, determination mixed with something that might have been nervousness. "Where are you going?" she asked. The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. She almost never initiated conversation. "Just across," he said, then seemed to catch himself. "Name's Vincent Lawson. Came up from Montana following the gold rush." "There is no gold on this side of the river," Sarah said flatly. "The claims are all east and north." Vincent's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "That's so." "Yes." They made the crossing in silence. Vincent paid her, crossed the river, and 3 hours later he was waiting to come back. Sarah took his money again, more confused than ever but determined not to show it. This pattern continued for a week. Every morning, Vincent Lawson would be waiting with his horse. Sarah would ferry him across. A few hours later, he would return. He never explained himself, and Sarah's pride would not let her ask again. But she found herself thinking about him during the empty hours between crossings, trying to puzzle out what he was doing on the 8th day. A storm rolled in. The wind howled across the river, whipping up waves that crashed against the ferry landing. Sarah stood on the dock, evaluating the conditions. She had made crossings in weather like this before, but it was dangerous. Most of her regular passengers had already decided to wait it out. But Vincent was there, standing beside his horse, snow gathering on his hat and shoulders. "You should wait," Sarah told him. "The river is too rough." "I trust you can make it," Vincent said. There was something in his voice, a quiet confidence that irritated and flattered her in equal measure. "It is dangerous. I know, but I need to cross." Sarah wanted to ask why. What was so important that he would risk his life every single day spending money he could not possibly afford to waste just to cross a river and come back? Instead, she said, "It will cost extra. Storm rate is $2. Fair enough." They loaded onto the ferry, and immediately Sarah knew she had made a mistake. The wind caught them as soon as they pushed off, spinning the ferry sideways. She fought with the oars, her muscles straining. Vincent moved without being asked, taking one oar while she managed the other, helping to stabilize their course. "Pull on the count," Sarah shouted over the wind. 1, 2, 3. They fell into a rhythm, working together. Vincent was strong, she noticed, and he had good instincts for the water. Halfway across, a chunk of ice slammed into the side of the ferry, nearly capsizing them. Vincent's horse whinnied in fear, but he spoke to her in low, soothing tones, keeping her calm. By the time they reached the far bank, both Sarah and Vincent were exhausted, their clothes soaked with spray that had already begun to freeze. Sarah's hands were numb inside her gloves. "You should stay on this side until the storm passes," she said. Vincent shook his head. "I will be back this afternoon." "That is insane, maybe." He looked at her, and there was something raw in his expression. "But I will be there," he was. The return crossing was even worse than the first. By the time they reached Nome, Sarah was shaking with cold and exhaustion. Vincent helped her secure the ferry, his hands steady on the ropes. "Why?" Sarah finally asked, too tired to hold the question back any longer. "Why do you keep crossing?" Vincent looked at her for a long moment. Snow had collected in his dark hair, making him look older. "Because you are on this side," he said quietly. Sarah stared at him, certain she had misheard over the wind. But Vincent did not take the words back, did not laugh or make light of them. He simply held her gaze, waiting. "That is ridiculous," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Probably," Vincent agreed. "But I saw you that first day, and I could not stop thinking about you. Strongest person I ever saw, rowing this ferry like it was nothing. I tried to ride on, told myself I had gold to find, made it about an hour before I turned around. You have been wasting your money just to see me. Not a waste if it worked." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his whole face. "Got you talking to me, did it not?" Despite herself, despite the cold and exhaustion and the absolute absurdity of the situation, Sarah felt something warm unfurl in her chest. She could not remember the last time someone had looked at her the way Vincent was looking at her now, like she was something precious and worth fighting for. "You could have just spoken to me in town," she pointed out. "Tried that the first day. Walked past your cabin 3 times but could not work up the courage to knock. Figured at least on the ferry you had to be near me." Sarah did not know what to say to that. She was not accustomed to being courted, and certainly not like this. Most men in Nome were interested only in gold or whiskey or the soiled doves at the saloon. The idea that someone would spend weeks ferrying back and forth across a dangerous river just for the chance to be near her seemed impossible. "I need to go warm up," she said finally. "I have another crossing scheduled in 2 hours." "Let me buy you coffee," Vincent said. "Please." "There is a place on Front Street." Sarah knew she should say no. She had work to do and she did not have time for complications. But she was cold and tired, and the way Vincent looked at her made her feel something she had not felt in years. Hope, maybe, or possibility. "1 coffee," she said. Vincent's smile could have lit up the whole frozen town. The coffee house was a rough establishment, just a large tent with a stove and some tables, but it was warm and the coffee was strong. Sarah wrapped her hands around the tin cup, letting the heat seep into her frozen fingers. Vincent sat across from her, his own coffee forgotten as he watched her. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "There is not much to tell. I run the ferry, that is all." "That cannot be all. Where are you from? How did you end up in Nome?" Sarah hesitated. She did not like talking about her past, but something about Vincent's open, honest expression made her want to try. "Minnesota originally. My father came north in the gold rush of '89. I came with him. My mother had died the year before and I had no other family. Must have been hard making that journey. Everything was hard back then, but my father needed me, so I came." She paused, then added quietly, "He died 2 years ago, left me the ferry. I am sorry. He was a good man, drank too much sometimes, but he loved me. Taught me to row, to read the river." Sarah looked down at her coffee. "Everyone said I should sell the ferry and go back to the States, but this is my home now. I am not leaving." "I am glad you stayed," Vincent said softly. They talked until Sarah had to leave for her next crossing. Vincent walked with her back to the landing, leading his horse. The storm had passed, leaving everything coated in fresh snow that glittered in the weak afternoon sun. "Can I see you again?" Vincent asked. "I mean not just on the ferry, properly." Sarah considered. Every practical bone in her body said this was a bad idea. Vincent was a drifter, a prospector who would probably leave as soon as the gold ran out or his luck turned bad. Getting attached to someone like that was asking for heartbreak. But when she looked at him, she saw something different. She saw the same thing she saw in the mirror every morning, that stubborn determination to survive and maybe, just maybe, find something worth holding on to. "Come to my cabin tomorrow evening," she said. "I will make dinner." Vincent's face lit up. "I will be there. Where should I?" "The small cabin past the trading post, blue door." "I will find it." He did not take the ferry that afternoon, Sarah noticed. He stayed in Nome, and she caught herself looking for him as she made her crossings, wondering where he was and what he was doing. That night, she cleaned her cabin more thoroughly than she had in months. It was not much, just 1 room with a bed, a stove, a table, and 2 chairs. But it was hers, paid for with her own money, and she wanted it to look nice. She made a stew with the last of her good meat and baked bread in the small Dutch oven she had inherited from her father. Vincent arrived exactly on time, his hair slicked back with water, wearing a clean shirt under his coat. He had brought a bottle of whiskey and a small bouquet of dried flowers that must have cost him a fortune in a place where nothing grew for 8 months of the year. "These are beautiful," Sarah said, surprised by the gesture. "Thought you might like something that was not white or gray," Vincent said, looking almost shy. They ate dinner together, and it felt remarkably natural. Vincent told her about growing up in Texas, about working cattle drives and learning to rope and ride before he could properly read. He talked about coming north after hearing stories of gold, about the long journey through Canada and the shock of Alaska's winter. "I thought Texas summers were hot," he said, laughing, "but I had no idea cold could hurt this much. That first night I honestly thought I might die." "Why stay?" Sarah asked. "Why not go back south?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, turning his cup in his hands. "I guess I felt like I had something to prove. My daddy always said I would never amount to anything, that I was too restless, too stubborn. I wanted to strike gold, go home rich, show him he was wrong. And have you found gold? Not much. Enough to get by, but nothing like I hoped." He looked up at her. "Funny thing is, I do not care as much as I thought I would. There are more important things than gold." The weight of his gaze made Sarah's heart beat faster. She stood, suddenly nervous, and began clearing the plates. Vincent helped without being asked, and they washed dishes together in comfortable silence. When everything was clean, they sat by the stove, sharing the whiskey Vincent had brought. The wind howled outside, but inside the cabin was warm and quiet. Sarah found herself telling Vincent things she had never told anyone, about how lonely she had been after her father died, about how hard it was to be a woman alone in this rough territory, about the nights when she lay awake wondering if this was all her life would ever be. "It does not have to be," Vincent said quietly. "You are the strongest, bravest person I have ever met, Sarah. You could do anything you wanted. This is what I want. The ferry, the river, it is mine." "Then I will be here too," Vincent said, "if you will have me. I can help with the ferry, take on some of the crossings so you do not have to do them all alone. We could be partners. You do not know what you are saying. Winter here is brutal. It lasts forever, and there is not much money in the ferry business. I do not care about the money. I care about you." Sarah looked at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or false promise, but all she saw was honesty and a tenderness that made her chest ache. "Stay tonight," she said. "The storm is getting worse. You should not try to get back to wherever you are staying." Vincent stayed. They talked until late into the night, sitting close together for warmth. When they finally slept, it was in Sarah's narrow bed, fully clothed, with Vincent's arms wrapped around her and his breath warm against her neck. Sarah could not remember the last time she had felt so safe. The next morning, Vincent was still there. He made coffee while Sarah started the fire, and they ate breakfast together as naturally as if they had been doing it for years. When it was time for the first crossing, Vincent came with her, helping to row and manage the passengers. He came the next day too, and the next. Within a week, it was simply understood that they were together, partners in the ferry business and in life. Vincent moved his few belongings into Sarah's cabin, and they settled into a routine that felt right in a way Sarah had never experienced before. Vincent was good with the passengers, friendly and reassuring in a way that Sarah had never managed. He had a gift for reading the river, learning quickly where the ice was thickest and where the current ran strongest. Together, they could make crossings that would have been impossible for Sarah alone, and word spread that the ferry was running more reliably than ever. The long winter nights were no longer lonely. They would lie together in the dark, talking about their dreams and fears, about the past and the future. Vincent taught Sarah to play poker, and she taught him Norwegian phrases she had picked up from the miners. They made love slowly and tenderly, learning each other's bodies with the same care they used to navigate the river. But not everything was easy. In late February, a group of drunk miners caused trouble on the ferry, refusing to pay and making crude comments about Sarah. Vincent stepped between them, his hand on the knife at his belt, his voice deadly calm. "You will pay the lady and you will show respect," he said, "or you will swim." The miners backed down, muttering, but Sarah saw the violence simmering beneath Vincent's calm exterior. That night she asked him about it. "I killed a man once," Vincent admitted quietly. "Back in Texas. He was rustling our cattle, shot my best friend. I tracked him down and put a bullet in him. That is part of why I left, why I came north. I was afraid of what else I might do." "Are you still afraid?" Sarah asked. "Sometimes. But not when I am with you. You make me want to be better." Sarah kissed him then, trying to put into the kiss everything she felt and could not say, that she understood, that she forgave him. That she was afraid, too, of losing him, of loving him too much, of this happiness being taken away. Spring came slowly to Alaska, the days lengthening bit by bit. The ice on the river began to thin, making crossings more dangerous than ever. Vincent and Sarah worked from dawn to dusk, ferrying miners who were eager to get to their claims after the long winter. One evening in April, as they secured the ferry for the night, Vincent took Sarah's hand. "Marry me," he said. Sarah's heart jumped. "What? Marry me?" "I know it is fast, and I do not have much to offer. But I love you, Sarah. I want to spend the rest of my life rowing this ferry with you, fighting this river, building something together. Will you marry me?" Sarah thought about all the reasons she should say no. They had known each other barely 3 months. Vincent was still essentially a stranger, a drifter who might leave when the novelty wore off. She had sworn after her father died that she would never depend on anyone else again. But then she looked at Vincent's face, at the hope and fear and love written there, and she thought about what her life had been like before him. Lonely, cold, going through the motions of survival without any real joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Vincent swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her protests. They were both laughing, giddy with happiness and relief. That night, they celebrated in the privacy of their cabin, making love with a new intensity, a new commitment. They were married a week later by the territorial magistrate, with 2 miners pulled off the street as witnesses. Sarah wore her best dress, a simple blue calico that had belonged to her mother. Vincent had somehow found a ring, a thin gold band that fit her finger perfectly. Afterward, they went to the saloon and bought drinks for everyone there, celebrating with the rough collection of prospectors, merchants, and drifters who made up Nome's population. Sarah found herself laughing more than she had in years, holding Vincent's hand and feeling like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, but their happiness was soon tested. In May, as the river ice finally broke up completely, a competitor arrived in Nome. His name was Marcus Finn, and he had brought with him a larger, more modern ferry that could carry twice as many passengers. He set up his operation a quarter-mile down from Sarah's landing, and immediately began undercutting their prices. "We will lose all our business," Sarah said, staring at the numbers in her ledger. They had barely made enough to get through the winter, and now with Finn stealing their customers, they would not make it through the summer. "Then we will find another way," Vincent said. "Maybe we could expand, offer other services." "Like what?" "Everyone in Nome is either looking for gold or selling to the people looking for gold." "What about freight?" "We could use the ferry to transport supplies, equipment. Finn's ferry is bigger, but ours is faster, more maneuverable. We could specialize in quick crossings, emergency transport." Sarah considered this. It made sense, and it played to their strengths. She and Vincent had developed an almost telepathic understanding on the water, able to navigate conditions that would strand a larger vessel. They spent the next week going to every merchant and mining operation in the area, offering their services. It was hard work, and there were plenty of rejections. But slowly, they built up a client base. A mining company hired them to transport time-sensitive equipment. A merchant paid them to make late-night crossings when he needed supplies from the warehouse on the far bank. The work was exhausting, and there were days when Sarah wondered if they would make it. But every night she would come home to Vincent, and he would hold her and tell her they would be fine, and she would believe him. In June, disaster struck. Sarah was making a crossing alone, carrying a load of mining equipment when the ferry struck a submerged log. The impact tore a hole in the hull, and water began pouring in. Sarah fought to get the ferry to shore, but she could feel it sinking beneath her. She managed to get close enough to jump, landing in the shallows and dragging herself onto the bank. The ferry sank in 15 feet of water, taking the mining equipment with it. Sarah sat on the shore, shaking with cold and shock, watching her livelihood disappear beneath the surface. Everything she and Vincent had worked for, everything her father had built, was gone. Vincent found her there an hour later, still sitting in her wet clothes. He had heard what happened from a passerby and had run the whole way from town. He wrapped her in his coat and held her while she cried, great heaving sobs that she had been holding in for months, maybe years. "It is gone," she said. "Everything is gone." "No," Vincent said firmly. "You are here, I am here, that is what matters, we will figure out the rest. How? We do not have money to replace the ferry, we will lose everything. Then we will start over, I still have my claim, maybe it will pan out. Or we can find other work. Sarah, I do not care if we are rich or poor, I just care about you." His words should have been comforting, but Sarah could not stop thinking about the ferry, about her father's legacy sinking into the mud. That night, she barely slept, lying awake and mentally calculating how much they owed, how long they could survive on their savings. The next morning, there was a knock on their door. Sarah opened it to find half a dozen miners standing outside, holding tools and lumber. "Heard about your ferry," one of them said. He was a Norwegian named Lars who had been one of Sarah's first regular passengers. "Thought you might need some help raising her." Sarah stared at them, not understanding. "I cannot pay you, did not ask you to. You have helped all of us plenty of times. Time we return the favor." Over the next week, the miners worked to raise the ferry. They built a temporary dam to divert the current, then used ropes and pulleys to lift the sunken vessel. It was back-breaking work, but they kept at it, refusing any payment beyond food and coffee. Vincent worked alongside them, and Sarah saw a new side of him. He was good with people, easy and friendly in a way that made others want to help. He joked with the miners, organized the work crews, and made sure everyone was fed and appreciated. When the ferry was finally raised, it was in bad shape. The hull was cracked, the oars broken, the whole thing covered in mud and algae. But it was salvageable, and with the help of a carpenter in town, they began the work of rebuilding. It took the entire summer. Vincent sold his mining claim to raise money for materials, a decision he made without hesitation, despite Sarah's protests. "There is no gold in that claim anyway," he said. "I was fooling myself thinking there ever would be. This is my life now, here with you. The ferry is our future." By September, the ferry was operational again, stronger than before. They had reinforced the hull, added better oars, and even built a small covered area to protect passengers from the worst of the weather. Sarah carved her father's name into the wood near the helm, a small memorial to the man who had started it all. Their first crossing with the repaired ferry was a celebration. Many of the miners who had helped with the salvage operation came along as passengers, cheering as Sarah and Vincent guided the vessel across the river. Even Marcus Finn showed up, grudgingly admitting that their smaller ferry had its advantages for certain jobs. As fall turned to winter and the river began to freeze again, Sarah and Vincent settled into their second winter together. They had survived poverty, disaster, and doubt. They had learned to trust each other completely, to work as a team in a way that made them stronger than either could have been alone. On Christmas Eve, as they sat by the stove in their cabin, Vincent gave Sarah a present. It was a painting, done by one of the miners who had artistic talent. It showed Sarah on the ferry, her face determined as she pulled the oars, with Vincent beside her and the vast Alaskan landscape stretching out behind them. "So you never forget how strong you are," Vincent said. "How amazing!" Sarah hung the painting on the wall where she could see it every day. That night, as they lay together in bed, she told Vincent that she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but had been afraid to say anything, afraid to hope. But now, seeing the joy and wonder on Vincent's face, she let herself feel the full weight of happiness. "A baby," Vincent breathed, his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Sarah asked. Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified, excited, grateful. He kissed her softly. "You are giving me everything I never knew I wanted." The pregnancy was difficult. Morning sickness kept Sarah off the ferry for weeks, and Vincent took over most of the crossings. He was protective to the point of being overbearing, insisting Sarah rest and refusing to let her lift anything heavier than a coffee pot. "I am pregnant, not dying," Sarah protested. "I know. But you are carrying our child. Let me take care of you." In the end, Sarah surrendered to his care, recognizing it for what it was, an expression of love and fear. Vincent had lost so much in his life, and she understood his need to protect what he had found. Their son was born in March 1893, delivered by the town's midwife during a blizzard that shut down the ferry for 3 days. It was a long, difficult labor, and there were moments when Sarah thought she might not survive. But Vincent was there the whole time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, being strong when she could not be. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Vincent cried. Sarah had never seen him cry before, and the sight of tears on his weathered face made her love him even more. They named him Daniel, after Sarah's father. He was a healthy baby with Vincent's green eyes and Sarah's determination. From the beginning, he seemed to love the sound of the river, calming instantly whenever they brought him down to the ferry landing. Parenthood changed them both. Vincent became even more focused on providing, taking on extra work and saving every penny. Sarah found reserves of patience and love she had not known she possessed. The sleepless nights and endless demands of a newborn were exhausting, but every time she looked at Daniel, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The ferry business continued to grow. As Nome expanded, becoming a real town with proper buildings and even a few paved streets, the need for reliable river transport increased. Sarah and Vincent hired their first employee, a young man named Peter who had come north seeking adventure. He was eager and hardworking, and having him meant Sarah and Vincent could take turns staying home with Daniel. By the time Daniel was 2, they had saved enough money to buy a second ferry. It was smaller than their main vessel, used primarily for passenger service while the larger ferry handled freight. Vincent managed one while Sarah managed the other, and they coordinated their schedules, so one of them was always home with Daniel. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The work was still hard, the winters still brutal, But Sarah and Vincent had built something solid and lasting. They had a home, a business, a child. They had each other. On their 4th wedding anniversary, Vincent surprised Sarah with a deed. He had bought the land where their cabin stood, along with a larger plot extending down to the river. "I thought we could build a real house," he said. "Something permanent. Big enough for Daniel and maybe more children if we are lucky. A place that is truly ours." Sarah looked at the deed, at their names written together in official script, and felt a swell of emotion. This was what she had wanted all along without really knowing it, a place to belong, roots that went deep, a family that was truly her own. They broke ground on the house that summer, working on it whenever they had time. It was a slow process, but that made it more meaningful somehow. Every board they nailed, every window they hung, was a testament to what they had built together. Daniel grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the river as much as his parents did. By age 4, he could identify different types of ice and predict the weather with uncanny accuracy. Vincent taught him to ride, and Sarah taught him to read using the few books they owned. In the spring of 1897, everything changed. Gold was discovered in the Klondike, and suddenly Nome was flooded with prospectors heading north. The population exploded from a few hundred to several thousand almost overnight. The demand for ferry service increased tenfold. Sarah and Vincent worked around the clock, making crossing after crossing, ferrying thousands of hopeful miners north to the goldfields. They hired more employees and eventually bought a 3rd ferry. The money poured in, more than Sarah had ever imagined possible. But with the prosperity came problems. The town became rougher, more dangerous. There were fights in the streets, claim disputes that turned violent, and a general lawlessness that worried Sarah. She did not want to raise Daniel in that environment. "Maybe we should think about leaving," she said one night after a particularly brutal fight outside the saloon had left 2 men dead. "We have money now. We could go somewhere safer, somewhere civilized." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "Is that what you want?" Sarah thought about it honestly. Part of her did want to leave, to take their money and go somewhere with proper schools and law enforcement. But another part of her could not imagine leaving the river, this place that had become home. "I do not know," she admitted. "Well, I do," Vincent said. "Nome needs people like us. Good people who care about more than just gold. If we leave, if everyone like us leaves, this place will never be anything but a rough camp. But if we stay, we can help build something real. It will be hard, dangerous. Everything worth doing is." Vincent took her hand. "But we do not have to decide right now. Let us just take it one day at a time like we always have." So they stayed. Vincent got involved in town politics, pushing for better law enforcement and schools. Sarah joined the committee to build a proper church. Together, they worked to transform Nome from a lawless camp into a real community. It was not easy. There were setbacks and frustrations and days when Sarah wanted to give up. But slowly, things improved. A marshal was appointed. A school was built. The worst of the violence subsided as the rule of law took hold. Through it all, the ferry remained the center of their lives. Sarah still took the oars most mornings, feeling the familiar burn in her muscles, the splash of cold water, the satisfaction of delivering passengers safely across. Vincent worked beside her, and sometimes Daniel came too, learning the business that would one day be his. In 1899, Sarah got pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter Emma was born without complications. She was a tiny, delicate baby who looked nothing like her robust brother, but had the same stubborn determination in her eyes. Daniel adored his little sister, treating her with a gentleness that made Sarah's heart ache. Vincent was just as smitten, spending hours rocking Emma while singing soft lullabies in his Texas drawl. The house was finally finished that same year, a large, sturdy building with glass windows and a real wooden floor. It had 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and even an indoor pump for water. Sarah could hardly believe it was theirs. They moved in on a bright July day, carrying their few possessions from the cabin to the new house. That night, they sat on the porch watching the midnight sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold while Daniel chased fireflies and Emma slept in Sarah's arms. "Remember when you first rode my ferry?" Sarah asked. Vincent laughed. "How could I forget? I was so nervous I could barely speak. I had this whole plan to introduce myself, to be charming and smooth. Instead, I just stood there like an idiot. So you decided to ride back and forth until you figured it out. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Cost me most of my money, but it was worth it." He kissed her temple. "Best investment I ever made." "I thought you were insane," Sarah admitted. "Who spends that much money just to cross a river?" "A man in love," Vincent said simply. Sarah leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, all the fear and struggle and joy. She thought about the girl she had been, alone and angry and convinced she would never need anyone. And she thought about who she was now, a wife and mother and business owner, surrounded by love. "I am glad you were insane," she said. The years passed quickly after that. Daniel grew tall and strong, taking over more of the ferry operations as he got older. Emma proved to have a head for numbers and started managing the business accounts when she was just 12. Vincent's hair turned gray, and Sarah found lines on her face that had not been there before, but they wore their age well, proud of the life they had built. Nome continued to grow and change. The gold rush eventually slowed, but the town remained, evolving into a legitimate settlement. The ferry business remained steady, an essential service for a community that depended on the river. In 1905, Vincent surprised Sarah with a trip to Seattle. It was her first time leaving Alaska in 16 years, and the journey south was like traveling to another world. They stayed in a real hotel with electric lights and running water. They went to restaurants and theaters and shops full of things Sarah had forgotten existed. But after 2 weeks, Sarah was ready to go home. As much as she enjoyed the luxuries of civilization, she missed the river. She missed the bite of cold wind and the sound of ice cracking. She missed Nome. "I think I have become more Alaskan than I realized," she told Vincent on the steamship north. "Me too," he agreed. "Texas stopped feeling like home a long time ago. Nome is where I belong now, where we belong." They arrived home to find that Daniel had managed the business perfectly in their absence, and Emma had reorganized the entire accounting system to be more efficient. Their children were growing up, becoming capable adults, and while Sarah felt a pang at how quickly time was passing, she was also proud of the people they were becoming. Daniel married at 21, wedding a sweet girl named Mary who had come to Nome with her family. Sarah and Vincent built them a small house on their property, and Mary quickly became part of the ferry operation, proving to have a natural talent for navigation. Emma showed no interest in marriage, preferring to focus on expanding the business. She had ideas for adding a freight service overland to the mining camps, and she threw herself into the planning with intense focus. Vincent supported her completely, proud to have a daughter who was so driven and capable. In 1910, Nome was hit by a terrible storm. The river flooded, destroying buildings and threatening to wash away the ferry landings. Sarah and Vincent worked for 3 days straight, evacuating people and securing their vessels. Daniel and Emma worked alongside them, and Mary coordinated rescue efforts from their house. When the storm finally passed, Much of the town was damaged, but no lives had been lost, largely due to the ferry crew's evacuation efforts. The town held a ceremony to honor them, and the mayor presented Sarah and Vincent with a plaque commemorating their years of service to the community. Standing there, surrounded by neighbors and friends, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She and Vincent had not just survived in this harsh land, they had thrived. They had built something that mattered, something that helped people. That night, lying in bed with Vincent, Sarah said, "I never thanked you." "For what?" "For being crazy enough to ride my ferry back and forth, for seeing something in me worth fighting for building this life with me." Vincent pulled her close. "I am the one who should be thanking you. You gave me everything. A home, a family, a purpose. Before I met you, I was just drifting, pretending I knew where I was going. You were the one who showed me what I was really looking for." "We found it together," Sarah said. "Yes, we did." By 1915, Sarah and Vincent had been married for 23 years. Daniel and Mary had given them 3 grandchildren, and Emma had finally met someone she cared about, a quiet engineer named Thomas who had come to Nome to work on the telegraph lines. The ferry business was more successful than ever, with 4 vessels operating regular routes. Sarah still took the ferry out most days, though not as often as before. She was 56 now, and while she was still strong, the hard physical labor took more of a toll than it once had. Vincent was 58 and had developed a persistent cough that worried Sarah, though he insisted it was nothing. That winter was particularly harsh. The temperatures dropped to 40 below zero, and ice formed on the river earlier and thicker than anyone could remember. The crossings became treacherous, requiring all their skill and experience to navigate safely. One morning in January, Vincent's cough was so bad he could barely get out of bed. Sarah insisted he stay home, and for once, he did not argue. She went to make the morning crossing alone, something she had not done in years. The river was brutal, with ice chunks the size of houses floating in the current. Sarah fought her way across, every muscle straining. When she finally reached the far bank, she was exhausted but satisfied. She had not lost her touch, but on the return journey, something went wrong. The ice shifted, catching the ferry and spinning it sideways. Sarah fought for control, but the current was too strong. The ferry slammed into an ice shelf, and Sarah was thrown into the water. The cold was shocking, stealing her breath. Sarah struggled to the surface, gasping. The ferry was drifting away, already 20 feet downstream. Sarah swam for shore, her heavy clothes dragging her down. She almost did not make it. Her fingers were numb, her limbs sluggish. But she thought of Vincent, of Daniel and Emma, of the grandchildren who would want to hear stories about their grandmother. She thought of everything she had survived, everything she had built, and she refused to let the river win. Sarah dragged herself onto the bank, shaking violently with cold. A miner who had been waiting for the ferry saw what happened and ran to help, wrapping her in blankets and getting her to the doctor. By the time Vincent arrived, frantic with worry, Sarah was warming up by a stove, battered but alive. He held her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she could feel him shaking. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "I thought you were gone." "I am too stubborn to die," Sarah said, trying to make light of it even though she was still scared herself. "You are not going out on the ferry anymore," Vincent said firmly. "I mean it, Sarah. We have people who can do the crossings. You have done enough." Sarah wanted to argue, but the truth was she was tired. She had been rowing that ferry for over 25 years, and maybe it was time to let someone else take over. "All right," she said, "but only if you promise to see a doctor about that cough." Vincent agreed, and they both kept their promises. The doctor diagnosed Vincent with pneumonia and ordered complete rest. Sarah nursed him through it, just as he had cared for her after her accident. It took weeks, but Vincent slowly recovered, though he was never quite as strong as he had been before. They stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ferry, letting Daniel and Emma take over. It was strange at first, watching others do the work they had done for so long. But it was also liberating. They had time to simply be together, to enjoy their home and family without the constant demands of the business. Vincent taught the grandchildren to ride, patient and gentle, as he led them around the yard on his old horse. Sarah told them stories about the early days of Nome, about the gold rush and the hard winters and how their grandfather had ridden the ferry back and forth just to see her. The children loved that story. "Grandpa must have really loved you," Daniel's oldest daughter said. "He did," Sarah agreed, smiling at Vincent across the room. "And I loved him right back." In 1920, Nome celebrated its 30th anniversary as an incorporated city. There was a big celebration with speeches and music and dancing. Sarah and Vincent were honored as founding residents, pioneers who had helped build the town. Standing on the platform, looking out at the crowd, Sarah marveled at how much had changed. The rough camp she had arrived at so many years ago was now a proper city with paved streets and electric lights. The ferry service she had inherited from her father had grown into a major transportation company. She and Vincent had not just survived, they had built something lasting. That night, they danced together for the first time in years, moving slowly to a waltz played by the town band. Vincent's hair was completely white now, and Sarah's face was lined with age, but when she looked at him, she still saw the young cowboy who had looked at her with such hope and determination all those years ago. "What are you thinking?" Vincent asked. "That I am grateful for all of it. The good and the bad, the easy times and the hard ones. I am grateful for every moment." "Me too," Vincent said, kissing her softly. "Every single moment." They lived quietly after that, content to watch their business thrive under their children's management and to enjoy their grandchildren. Vincent's health was fragile, and Sarah had her own aches and pains, but they were happy, surrounded by the family and community they had built. In the summer of 1925, Vincent fell ill again. This time, it was clear he would not recover. The doctor did what he could, but Vincent's lungs were damaged from too many years breathing cold air and from the pneumonia that had never fully healed. Sarah stayed by his side, holding his hand and talking to him about their life together. Daniel and Emma came, bringing the grandchildren to say goodbye. Vincent smiled at each of them, his green eyes still bright even as his body failed. On a warm August evening, with Sarah beside him and the midnight sun streaming through the window, Vincent took his last breath. He died peacefully, a small smile on his face, holding Sarah's hand. Sarah sat with him for a long time after, memorizing every detail of his face, remembering every moment they had shared. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain in her chest. But underneath the pain was gratitude. She had been given 33 years with the love of her life, 33 years of partnership and joy and deep, abiding love. They buried Vincent on the hill overlooking the river, in a cemetery plot next to Sarah's father. The whole town turned out for the funeral, testimony to the impact Vincent had made. Person after person spoke about his kindness, his integrity, his willingness to help anyone who needed it. After the funeral, Sarah stood alone at the grave, looking down at the river where she had first met Vincent. She could almost see him standing on the ferry landing, young and nervous and determined. She could almost hear his voice saying, "Because you are on this side." "I will see you again," she whispered. "Wait for me." The months after Vincent's death were the hardest of Sarah's life. She missed him constantly in ways both large and small. She missed his voice, his laugh, the way he always knew when she needed comfort. She missed the life they had built together, but she was not alone. Daniel and Emma were there along with their families. The grandchildren visited constantly, filling the house with noise and life. And the river was still there, flowing past just as it always had, eternal and unchanging. Sarah took to walking down to the river each evening, watching the ferries make their crossings. Sometimes Daniel would join her, and they would talk about Vincent, remembering him together. Those conversations helped, keeping Vincent's memory alive. As the months turned into years, the sharp edge of grief dulled into a gentler sadness. Sarah learned to live with the loss, to find joy again in small things. A grandchild's laugh, the first snow of winter, the smell of coffee in the morning. She stayed active in the business, not doing the physical work anymore, but providing guidance and wisdom earned from decades of experience. She became something of a town matriarch, someone people came to for advice and counsel. In 1930, Nome held a celebration for Sarah's 70th birthday. The whole town turned out, honoring the woman who had been rowing the ferry when most of them arrived, who had helped build the community they all called home. They presented her with a painting of the ferry, with her and Vincent at the oars, and the sight of it made her cry. That night, Sarah sat on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, looking at the stars. She thought about the long, winding path that had brought her here, from Minnesota to Alaska, from a scared, lonely girl to this moment of deep contentment and peace. She thought about her father, who had brought her north and taught her the river. She thought about Vincent, who had loved her so completely and built this life with her. She thought about Daniel and Emma and their children and the generations yet to come. The ferry bell rang in the distance, signaling a late crossing. Sarah smiled. The river kept flowing and the ferry kept running, just as it always would. She and Vincent had built something that would outlast them, something meaningful and good. As she sat there under the vast Alaskan sky, Sarah felt Vincent's presence almost as clearly as if he were sitting beside her. She felt his love, unchanging and eternal, and she knew with absolute certainty that their story was not over. It would continue in their children and grandchildren, in the business they had built, in the town they had helped create. And someday, when it was her time, she would cross that final river and find Vincent waiting on the other side, just as he had waited for her on the ferry landing so many years ago. He would smile at her, take her hand, and they would continue together into whatever came next. But for now, Sarah was content to sit and remember, to honor the love they had shared and the life they had built. She pulled the blanket tighter and watched the stars, feeling grateful for every moment, every memory, every hard-won piece of happiness. The river flowed past, constant and eternal, carrying the ferry back and forth just as it had for 40 years. And Sarah sat in peace, knowing that she had lived a life full of love and purpose, knowing that Vincent's crazy decision to ride her ferry back and forth all those years ago had led to something beautiful and lasting. As the northern lights began to dance across the sky, painting it in shades of green and purple, Sarah whispered into the night, "Thank you for being crazy enough to love me." And though Vincent was gone, she could almost hear his voice on the wind, warm and full of love, saying, "Thank you for letting me." Sarah lived for 8 more years, surrounded by family and honored by her community. She watched her grandchildren grow and even met her first great-grandchild, a boy named Vincent in honor of his great-grandfather. She told them all stories about the old days, about the gold rush and the hard winters and the cowboy who had ridden the ferry back and forth until he won her heart. In the spring of 1938, at the age of 78, Sarah passed away peacefully in her sleep. They buried her next to Vincent on the hill overlooking the river, and the whole town mourned the loss of one of Nome's founding mothers. But Sarah's legacy lived on. The ferry business continued to operate, passed down through generations of her family. The house she and Vincent built remained standing, home to their descendants. And the story of the ferry woman and the cowboy who loved her became part of Nome's history, told and retold, a reminder that even in the hardest places, love could take root and flourish. The river kept flowing, the ferry kept running, and their love story became legend. Proof that sometimes the most unlikely romances create the most lasting legacies. Sarah and Vincent had found each other against all odds, built a life together in one of the harshest places on earth, and created something that would endure long after they were gone. Their story was one of determination and courage, of taking chances and fighting for what mattered. It was about finding home not in a place but in a person, about building something meaningful from nothing. It was about love that endured through hardship and grew stronger with each passing year. And it all started with a cowboy brave enough to ride a ferry back and forth across a frozen river, day after day, until the strong, silent woman at the oars finally noticed him and let him into her heart. From that simple beginning came a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of persistence, the strength of partnership, and the enduring nature of true love. The ferry still crosses the river in Nome, Alaska, operated now by Sarah and Vincent's great-great-grandchildren, carrying passengers just as it has for over a century. And on the wall of the ferry office hangs the original painting, showing a young woman and a young man rowing together, their faces determined, their love evident in every brushstroke. Beneath it, a plaque tells their story in simple words. Sarah Winters and Vincent Lawson, founders of the Nome ferry service, married 1892. He rode the ferry every day just to see her. She finally said yes. Together they built a legacy that endures. And every winter, when the river freezes and the crossings become treacherous, the ferry operators remember Sarah and Vincent, drawing strength from their example, knowing that if those two could build a life and a love in such harsh conditions, anything is possible. Their story reminds everyone who hears it that love is worth fighting for, that persistence pays off, and that sometimes the craziest gestures lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Vincent's daily crossings seemed foolish to everyone who witnessed them, but they won him the love of his life and started a legacy that would span generations. Sarah's willingness to take a chance on love, despite all her reasons to stay guarded and alone, led to a partnership that transformed not just her life but an entire community. Together, they proved that love and hard work can create something lasting and meaningful, even in the most unlikely places. As the northern lights continue to dance over Nome, Alaska, and the ferry continues to cross the river, Sarah and Vincent's love story lives on, inspiring each new generation to be brave enough to take chances on love, to work hard for what matters, and to build something beautiful together, one crossing at a time.